Picture this. It's a calm morning in Seoul. Office workers are rushing to the subway, kids are walking to school, traders are sipping coffee as the stock market prepares to open. And then, out of nowhere, over 20,000 North Korean artillery pieces roar to life. Within minutes, the South Korean capital is engulfed in fire. Tens of thousands of shells and rockets rain down on neighborhoods, hospitals, subway stations. What was once the beating heart of global technology becomes a war zone in the blink of an eye. The question is, what happens next? Do we see a replay of 1950, when the Korean War first erupted and left more than 3 million dead? Or do we face something far worse? A nightmare of nuclear detonations, stealth bombers streaking through the skies, cyber attacks shutting down banks, and the collapse of the world's semiconductor supply chain in just a matter of days. 70 years of silence. On July 27, 1953, in the small village of Panmunjom, the Armistice was signed. The guns went silent, but peace never truly came. Legally, North and South Korea are still at war to this day. For 70 years, razor wire and minefields at the demilitarized zone have stood as a raw scar across the peninsula. Many assume that 7 decades without open war means stability. But history tells a harsher truth. Long silences often end with sudden explosions. In June 1914, Europe basked in peace and prosperity. One assassination in Sarajevo lit the fuse for World War I. In early 2022, countless experts insisted Russia would never invade Ukraine. The costs were too high, the risks too great, the world too interconnected. And yet, war came anyway, shattering every assumption. There's a cruel pattern. Humanity convinces itself the worst won't happen until it does. And today, the Korean Peninsula holds every ingredient for catastrophe. A regime that believes its only guarantee of survival lies in nuclear weapons. A nation that leans on its alliance with the United States to protect its economic and technological edge. A border less than 30 miles from Seoul, one of the world's densest megacities. And a global economy utterly dependent on South Korean microchips to fuel the AI era. If a second Korean War erupts, will it remain confined to the peninsula or spiral into a global confrontation pulling in the United States, Japan, China, Russia, and perhaps even NATO? If South Korea, the very heart of the semiconductor industry, collapses under bombardment, could the world withstand an economic shock greater than the COVID pandemic? And most chilling of all, if the North feels its regime pushed to the brink, would it dare press the nuclear button, turning this into the last war humanity ever fights with conventional weapons? June 1950. War explodes on the Korean Peninsula. For 3 long years, blood and fire consumed this land. Over 3 million lives were lost. Seoul, the South Korean capital, was captured and recaptured 4 times. Armies surged across the 38th parallel like tidal waves, sweeping civilians into the chaos. And then, on July 27, 1953, in the quiet village of Panmunjom, the guns finally fell silent. An armistice was signed. But let's be clear, it was not a peace treaty, which means legally North and South Korea are still at war to this very day. For nearly 70 years, the world has spoken of the end of the Korean War. But in truth, it never ended. It simply froze, like a wound bandaged but never healed. After 1953, the peninsula split into two worlds moving in opposite directions. South Korea rose from the ashes, what people call the miracle on the Han River, transformed a war-torn, impoverished nation into a global powerhouse of technology, automobiles, and pop culture. Today, chips produced in Seoul and Suwon are the lifeblood of the modern economy. North Korea, instead of chasing an economic miracle, pursued a different kind of miracle: deterrence. Decades of sanctions, isolation, and crisis didn't break the regime. Their survival strategy became clear: nuclear weapons. By the early 21st century, Pyongyang had succeeded, joining the small and dangerous club of nations with the atomic bomb. The 250-kilometer demilitarized zone still stands as one of the most fortified borders on Earth. On one side, gleaming skyscrapers, subways, and high-speed internet. On the other, mass parades, underground tunnels, and ballistic missiles shooting into the skies. The world has moved on. The peninsula has not. It remains a ticking time bomb, and the clock has never stopped ticking. Every time relations seem to thaw, handshakes at Panmunjom, photo ops between leaders, the illusion quickly shattered. Within a few years, artillery thundered again, missiles flew again. The truth is stark. The Korean War never really ended. It's just been on pause. And over 7 decades, a paradox has defined the standard. The more South Korea prospered, the more it depended on stability. The more North Korea was isolated, the more it relied on nuclear threats. One side needs peace to export semiconductors. The other needs tension to preserve its regime. It is this contradiction that makes the Korean Peninsula perhaps the most dangerous flashpoint on the planet. This is the historical and political backdrop we must understand. If war erupts again, it won't look like 1950. It will be faster, deadlier, and global in scale. Lay a map of the Korean Peninsula on the table. Take a ruler. Measure the distance from the demilitarized zone to downtown Seoul, and you'll get a number that makes every general shiver: barely 30 miles. That means the capital of a $7 trillion economy, the global hub of technology, sits right under the shadow of North Korean artillery. It is the most unsettling paradox in Asian security. One of the most modern cities on Earth lives every day within range of thousands of aging, yet deadly, guns. North Korea, the fortress of desperation. North Korea fields 28 million active troops and several million reservists, one of the largest armies on the planet. Its strength, however, lies not in technology, but in sheer numbers and hardened defenses. Artillery. Estimates range from 14,000 to 20,000 guns and rocket launchers, many hidden in reinforced bunkers carved into mountains. A Rand Corporation simulation once suggested that in the very first hour of war, North Korean barrages could inflict anywhere from 500 to 200,000 casualties in Seoul, depending on evacuation readiness. Ballistic missiles, KN-23s, and upgraded Scuds with ranges of 300 to over 1,000 kilometers. They lack the precision of American systems, but in mass volleys, terror is the real weapon. Nuclear arsenal. SIPRI estimates 30 to 50 nuclear warheads. These aren't built to win a war. They are built to ensure the regime isn't erased. Air Force, a glaring weakness. A few dozen MiG-29s and Su-25s, but the bulk of the fleet is ancient MiG-21s and MiG-23. Against South Korea's F-35s or F-15Ks, the outcome would be one-sided. Navy, mostly menace submarines, torpedo boats, and coastal mines. Annoying, yes. Game-changing, no. Not against the U.S. ROK modern fleets. North Korea is in essence a crumbling fortress, thick walls, nuclear warheads buried deep in mountains, and one grim strategy: inflict horrific losses in the opening minutes to shock the world into backing off. South Korea, technology over numbers. Across the border stands a smaller but far more advanced force. Manpower, roughly 500-580,000 active troops backed by 1 million trained reserves. Air power, the crown jewels: F-35 Lightning Roman II, F-15K Slam Eagles, KF-16. With American support, Seoul could dominate the skies within days. Navy, Aegis-equipped Sejong the Great Destroyers, KSS Roman III attack submarines and layered missile defense systems, commanding strength in Korea's narrow seas. Missiles, Hyunmoo 3 cruise missiles, range 501,000 km, capable of hitting any target in the north with precision. Army, K2 Black Panther tanks, K9 Thunder self-propelled artillery, considered among the world's best. South Korea has no nuclear weapons of its own, but it lives under America's nuclear umbrella. That's the key. If Pyongyang dares cross the nuclear line, Washington's response would be overwhelming. The United States, the gatekeeper. Even in peacetime, the U.S. keeps about 500 troops in South Korea, plus tens of thousands more in Japan and Guam. If war breaks out, America instantly becomes the gatekeeper, unleashing air and naval power to blunt North Korea's first blows. Within a week, U.S. air power could neutralize most of North Korea's aircraft. Carrier strike groups, B-2 and B-52 bombers, and Tomahawk cruise missiles could reach deep into hardened sites. The hardest nut to crack: North Korea's vast underground artillery bunkers, dug deep, dispersed, and impossible to wipe out quickly. Look closely at this battlefield, and you see a strange balance. North Korea has the numbers, the artillery, and nuclear leverage, but not the technology. South Korea has the technology, the alliances, and global backing, but geography leaves it dangerously exposed. In a way, each side cancels out the other. North Korea cannot march south easily. South Korea cannot feel fully safe with its capital under the gun. That fragile equilibrium has kept the peninsula from exploding into all-out war for 70 years. If this sounds familiar, it is. In 1914, Europe was locked in a similar paradox. Every power thought it held the advantage, but in truth, all were vulnerable. When war finally came, there was no quick victory, only mutual ruin. So the question, who's stronger, who's weaker, has no simple answer. On the Korean Peninsula, power is not just measured in weapons, but in the willingness to endure casualties and the risk of pushing escalation to the point of no return. When it comes to a second Korean War, there is no single script. History, politics, and nuclear weapons make every move unpredictable. But from a geopolitical lens, we can sketch 3 broad scenarios, ranging from a limited skirmish to doomsday. Scenario 1, a limited clash. In this case, the war doesn't start with nukes, but with drones, artillery strikes, and skirmishes at sea. Picture this. North Korea fires missiles at a U.S. base in South Korea, or shells a disputed border island. South Korea responds with precision airstrikes, and American F-35s roar out of ASEAN Air Base. It's the classic tit-for-tat, reminiscent of the 2010 Yeonpyeong Island shelling or the torpedoing of the Cheonan warship. There are casualties, tensions rise, but both sides scramble to keep it contained. Because no one, not even Pyongyang, wants to see Seoul reduced to ashes over a single incident. Scenario 2, full-scale war. The darker scenario. North Korea unleashes everything. Tens of thousands of artillery guns, volleys of ballistic missiles, and 1 million troops charging across the 38th parallel. Seoul drowns in fire. South Korea declares full mobilization, calling up 3 million reservists. The United States rushes reinforcements from Japan, Guam, and Pacific Carrier Strike Groups. Japan, despite its constitutional limits, joins collective defense, at least with missile defense systems and logistics. Meanwhile, China and Russia may quietly feed Pyongyang weapons, intelligence, and fuel while trying to avoid direct clashes with U.S. forces. In the opening weeks, casualties could soar into the hundreds of thousands. Both Koreas would be shattered, and the conflict would no longer be a Korean problem. It would become a miniature world war. Scenario 3, nuclear escalation. This is the nightmare. If Pyongyang believes its regime is collapsing, it might go for a die-together option, using tactical nuclear weapons against a U.S. base or even Seoul itself. Just one bomb could kill millions and shock the entire world. America's response would almost certainly be overwhelming. Massive airstrikes, blockades, perhaps even U.S. tactical nukes. At that moment, Beijing and Moscow would face their own fateful decision: stay on the sidelines or wade in to save their ally. That's the point where a regional war could ignite into World War III. What do all three scenarios have in common? None end quickly. None end cleanly. Whether it's limited skirmishes, total war, or nuclear escalation, each leaves behind catastrophic consequences, not just for the Koreas, but for the global economy and international security. When a single shot is fired on the Korean Peninsula, its echo doesn't stop in Seoul or Pyongyang. It reverberates in Washington, Beijing, Tokyo, and Moscow. That's the geopolitical paradox. A tiny stretch of land with the power to shake the world. The United States, the Pacific gatekeeper. Even in peacetime, the U.S. keeps roughly 500 troops stationed in South Korea. Bases like ASEAN and Kunsan Air Force Base, along with the naval hub in Busan, aren't just pillars of South Korea's defense. They are symbols of Washington's commitment to Northeast Asia. If war erupts, America doesn't get to sit this one out. Why? Abandoning Seoul would shatter U.S. credibility across its entire alliance network, from Japan to the Philippines to NATO. If North Korea uses nuclear weapons without a U.S. response, every small nation on Earth will draw the same conclusion. Only nukes guarantee survival.
Sir,
so Washington will step in hard.
Yes, I see it.
Expect carriers,
What is their
B-2
objective?
and B-52 bombers, F-22s and F-35s. Within a week, America could dominate the skies. But erasing North Korea's entrenched artillery, that's another matter entirely. And the haunting question remains: how many lives is Washington willing to spend to save Seoul? Japan, a constitution in chains. After World War II, Japan was bound by Article 9 of its constitution, renouncing the right to wage war. But the world has changed. Since 2015, new security laws allow Tokyo to join in collective defense if an ally is attacked. That means Japan won't send divisions storming across the DMZ, but Tokyo will still play a critical role. Aegis Ashore and Patriot PAC-3 missile defense systems, logistics, medical support and resupply for U.S. forces, access to key bases like Okinawa and Yokosuka for American operations. Japan won't be the tip of the spear, but it will be the backbone that makes the spear work. China, the reluctant neighbor. In 1950, China poured over 1 million volunteers across the Yalu River to rescue North Korea. But in 2025, Beijing faces a different equation, balancing economic growth, rivalry with Washington, and domestic stability. Yes, China still has its 1961 alliance treaty with North Korea. But would Beijing send troops again? Almost certainly not. Instead, expect the safer path: fuel, food, and logistical lifelines, intelligence and cyber support, diplomatic muscle to prevent the U.S. and South Korea from erasing Pyongyang altogether. For Beijing, a hostile but surviving North Korea is preferable to a unified U.S. aligned Korea parked right on China's border. Russia, Pyongyang's new patron. Back in 1950, the Soviet Union armed and trained North Korea. Today, a Russia isolated over Ukraine has every incentive to cozy up to Pyongyang. In June 2024, Moscow and Pyongyang signed a new security pact, pledging mutual support if attacked. Translation: if the U.S. or South Korea strikes first, Russia could ship missiles, munitions, or intelligence to North Korea, the same way North Korean shells now prop up Russian forces in Ukraine. Will Moscow send troops? Unlikely, with Europe still bleeding resources. But will it use the Korean conflict as a second front to stretch America thin?
Targets now.
Very likely. ASEAN and the rest of the world. Even Southeast Asia won't be spared. Trade routes through the South China Sea and the Strait of Malacca could choke, triggering economic shocks across the region. Allies like Thailand and the Philippines might even open their bases to U.S. forces. And NATO. Technically, Article 5 doesn't cover East Asia, but remember, Britain, Canada, Australia, and France all sent forces to Korea under the UN flag in 1950. Don't rule out a repeat, framed as defending international security. From Washington to Tokyo, from Beijing to Moscow, every major power has its calculations. But one fact is certain: if the Korean Peninsula goes up in flames, no one can truly remain on the sidelines. That's what makes this different from 1950. Today, war in Korea doesn't just mean war in Korea. It means the whole world is suddenly all in on nuclear security, semiconductor supply chains, alliance politics, and the fate of millions of ordinary civilians. Many people assume if a second Korean War ever happens, it'll just be another conflict in Northeast Asia. The truth, its consequences would spill far beyond the 38th parallel. They would reach your wallet, your job, even your dinner table, whether you live in New York, Paris, or Hanoi. Remember this: South Korea isn't just a country. It is the beating heart of the global semiconductor industry. Samsung and SK Hynix produce more than 70% of the world's DRAM and high-bandwidth memory, chips that fuel artificial intelligence, smartphones, supercomputers. If Seoul goes up in flames and the fabs shut down, the world faces a disruption greater than COVID ever caused. No chips for cars, right arrow global assembly lines collapse. Memory shortages, right arrow the internet. AI, and cloud computing grind to a halt, prices skyrocket, right arrow global inflation surges. A war on the Korean Peninsula wouldn't just be war. It would be an economic hurricane sweeping across continents. The humanitarian crisis, a wave of refugees. The Syrian civil war displaced millions. The Ukraine war in 2022 sent millions more across Europe. But even combined, they may pale in comparison to the refugee crisis unleashed by a full-scale Korean war. Millions of North Koreans could pour into China and Russia. Hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions, of South Koreans might flee to Japan, the U.S., or allied nations. Evacuations by sea and air would cost hundreds of billions of dollars. And in that chaos, death wouldn't come only from bombs. Hunger, disease, and collapsing welfare systems would become silent killers. A new Korean War would shake the global order itself. The United States would be forced to prove its role as world policeman. While fighting two fronts, Ukraine in Europe and Korea in Asia. China would face a nightmare dilemma. Can't abandon Pyongyang, but intervening too deeply risks sanctions, encirclement, and lost Western markets. Russia might use Korea as a distraction from Ukraine, but risks being dragged into yet another costly front. ASEAN and Europe would suffer from disrupted trade, energy shortages, and refugee flows. This wouldn't just be a regional conflict. It could redraw the map of global alliances. Two rival blocs, Cold War style, but more dangerous this time because nuclear weapons sit on the table from day one. Back in 1950, many dismissed Korea as a small, distant war. Yet it killed millions and reshaped the Cold War. If it happens again in the 21st century, with nukes and globalized supply chains, the consequences will stretch beyond anything we can imagine. For over 70 years, the Korean Peninsula has been a scar that never healed. It reminds us that war doesn't truly end with an armistice, and peace doesn't survive without constant effort. If a second Korean War erupts, it won't just be two siblings fighting. It will be the harshest test of the entire international order since World War II. Global markets could crash. Millions could lose their homes, and the nuclear shadow could push humanity to the brink. But history also teaches another truth. Sometimes restraint is the greatest power of all. In 1914, a lack of restraint lit the fuse for World War I. In 1962, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, restraint saved the world from annihilation. So I leave you with this question. If war comes, what will decide the outcome? Military might, nuclear shields, or the wisdom of leaders? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's debate. Let's reflect. And if you want to keep exploring history's what-ifs with us, make sure to hit subscribe so you never miss the next analysis. Because, as the philosopher George Santayana once warned, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it.